Hi everyone, Robert Mac Giolla Phádraig here from Sigmar, and we are a week out from Talent Summit happening live in Dublin on March 9th. What's set to be the largest ever gathering of HR people in Ireland. I am delighted to be joined by one of our partners and a global thought leader on all things HR. Richa is the Chief People Officer of Globalization Partners. Richa, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Robert. I am so delighted to be here with you.
I've learned a couple of things from our conversation. One, there are two Dublins in this world. I'm in Dublin, Ireland, and you are?
In Dublin, California.
Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny? And you guys have dropped the word office in where you have a location as part of practicing what you preach, I guess. So for those who don't know, Globalization Partners, or GP, the recent rebrand, you enable the hiring of distributed teams. So hire anyone, anywhere in a compliant, quick, efficient manner. We've been working with you with some of our clients, and it's enabled quick hiring of very difficult to find skills in lesser known locations that have given our customers competitive advantage when hiring. I might jump in, Richa, if I may. I think very simply about the world of work. And the theme of our conference this year is the tug of war of work. And in many ways, it's a very confusing labor market. And a lot of contradictions are playing out before our eyes. And I have a feeling that we've spoken a lot about the impact of employees and or employers, and both have been pitted against each other over the last 3 years in particular. And we've lost sight in many ways of customer and other stakeholders. But when I think about the world of work, I think of workplace, I think of workforce, and what binds both are work practices. I'd love to explore some of those components, if I may. And the first question I have for you, I'd love to get your sense of what are you seeing play out right now? What trends are you seeing around distributed workforces, and what are we likely to see for the year ahead?
Absolutely. It's a wonderful question, Robert. And let's talk about what you mentioned at the beginning of the call, that was around GP dropping the word office from our vocabulary. And there's a deeper meaning and purpose behind it. So it was about 16, 20 months ago when we declared our intent to be a remote first company. In many ways, we believe that either you're totally in person or totally remote. Hybrid is difficult. It is so difficult to manage. And we said, we're just going to declare our intent that people don't need to be in office to be working, right? We are allowing everybody and empowering them to work remotely. And that connects with our purpose of remote expansions for our customers as well. We do have collaboration hubs across the world where our dream team, we call our employees dream team, come together and collaborate and whiteboard and connect socially and do good work and have wonderful conversations. But we don't go to offices every day. And that has really helped. That element of clarity has really helped. Going back to your question on the work practices, how we have made it happen is through just the enablement of technology, right? I mean, you've got to replace the work from anywhere with technology. So there's plenty of technology tools that are available to our dream team to connect on platforms like Zoom and Slack and email, and we have Google Drives and things like that for synchronous and asynchronous communications. So that element of providing technology to make connections is important, but we haven't stopped there. No company can, right? You have to then step back and look at all of your work practices and say, are these work practices human-centric? You know, the element of YOLO, you only live once, comes to mind. And it is no mystery that now more than ever, employees are looking for the choice. So the concept of employee choice that comes with, I want to work on my own terms, like the flexible work arrangements, et cetera. Ultimate flexibility, autonomy on helping people create their work hours around what their life demands, right, has been the theme of the work practices that we have adopted in connection with the availability of the technology to make all of this happen.
Can I tease that out a bit further, Richa? So again, the narrative has changed. So the debate around workplace, you move to fully distributed, um, virtual first type work model. And there's been a big change in views amongst employers on that question this last 12 months. And the conversation has leaned more towards productivity. It has leaned more towards ability to collaborate. And flexibility, although it's deeply individualized, there needs to be an alignment amongst a dream team around timing and to be available to collaborate. And I've seen and heard a lot of conversations around, say, some companies who've pulled out of Ireland, for example, because they felt they were too distributed and they adopted a hub and spoke type model. How do you deal with the difference of time zones, and how do you deal with the difference of individual timing of work, and how do you create a kind of a crossover of timing in order to collaborate?
Absolutely. We have a term for this, Robert. We call it golden hours. And GP is a highly distributed company when it comes to global time zones and locations, et cetera. So we are promoting this concept of golden hours to say for each employee, you have a choice to create your own work hours that are golden hours. And golden hours are the hours where you overlap with other colleagues across other time zones who you need to work with. What are those hours? And they're different for everybody, right? So not everybody can sleep in the day, work in the night, right? That is not practical or possible. But we encourage people to identify what are those overlapping hours where they can come together with the colleagues in the other regions. And we have given our employees the choice, again, the choice and the flexibility to create their workday in the way that works for their lives as well as for their work. So that concept has come really, really handy. Some of the other things, Robert, is to make remote work successful, we have crafted very intentionally and promoted our remote first commitments and guiding principles, right? So golden hours is one of them. But you and I both know that with lines blurring between work and home, when you're working from home, you never leave work, right? I mean, laptop is already always in front of you, you're feeding kids, and then you're coming back to emails, and it's not sustainable, right? So we are promoting that our employees take 10 hours a week of focused time, and block your calendars, right? Where you are accepting no meetings. This is your time to collaborate. The concept of golden hours comes handy. We promote the need for taking at least 3 consecutive days off in a quarter, at least, right? So that concept comes handy. Another one is we have launched a program called GP Connect. To your point around, how you can't replace the human connection, right? It's so necessary. We're all humans. We have those basic needs of connecting with other humans, colleagues in person. We have launched a quarterly stipend program called GP Connect, where we give all employees some amount of money to say, go find your local colleagues and meet with them at least once a quarter and expense it, right? So that permission, that overt permission helps us a lot. So you can craft your own hours, work from home, craft your hours for what makes sense for you, but you also have opportunity to go connect with your colleagues. All of last year, though, we did a lot of road shows. So the executive team traveled from hubs to hubs and collected all people in one country. So we came to Ireland, we collected all people from Ireland and Galway, for example, right? and talked about strategy, just shared a meal, shared a drink. It was such a fantastic human connection experience, right? So we did a lot of that last year. This year, the executive level connection strategy is going to be different. A couple of weeks ago, we brought all of the leaders in a location in Miami globally, right, and we locked ourselves in the room for 3 days and talked about strategy and what does 2023 mean, and how do we accelerate together. So that level of connection, right? So we always look for the balance of the technology as well as where we can organically create those human connections. And there's a diverse strategy. I won't know what next year would look like in terms of making the human connection, but last year was all about roadshows. This year is all about GP Connect, kind of organically employee-led social gatherings and a lot of leadership connection in person to get the company moving forward.
It sounds to me like a high touch approach to low touch work. It's very intentional. And there's two words that jump out at me in listening to you. So one is choice.
Yeah.
So employees having choice, and you as an employer giving permission.
Absolutely.
And again, it's a really interesting kind of concept. So again, back to the tug of war of work, you could see those things opposing, but I think through giving permission, it drives a behavior. And if you think about trying to drive behavior in a cultural context, I think about it here in Ireland, for example, when a policy was introduced where you can no longer smoke in a pub, for example, we thought would never happen. But the fact that choice was taken away, it drove a behavior. And I see the intentionality behind what you just described, and it makes a lot of sense to me now that I'm listening to you.
And there is
Can I,
one more element to those
please?
two things, which is I think you called the risks for productivity in the remote first environments. I think it all leads back to trust in your employee base, right? You treat people well, they treat you well. Like that's an age-old saying, and it's so true in today's world too. The productivity paranoia, right? It doesn't take any company anywhere. So, either you're managing a hybrid workforce or remote workforce, you've got to trust your employees, but you've got to set good goals. You've got to hold people accountable. You've got to have ways to communicate to them, and you've got to create the feedback loop. So all of the good operational practices in a company have to go along with employee choice and everything else. But I think together, if you look at holistically, it's very manageable, and I think it's a fantastic leap ahead in the employee-employer relationship that you're talking about.
Yeah, I love it. And it sounds to me there's a good balance of or between freedom and responsibility. And again, they go hand in hand. And you actually remind me of one of our speakers. So we've got a delegation over from NASA. So we have the head of astronaut selection giving a talk, which will be really interesting. And we
Yeah.
have the head of learning and development. And we're also going to examine the behaviors and the leadership that drove that famous story of JFK meeting the janitor, where he said, what do you do here? He asked me a question, what do you do? He goes, I help put man on moon. And that level of purpose that drives that discretionary effort and therefore the fellowship. But a leading value that enables a lot of this is assuming positive intent. So you mentioned trust. I think that's a good place to start. You reminded me of that as you mentioned it.
Exactly. And how a company sets the values, and not, there are no walls to put values on, right, anymore. So you better
Hubs.
publish them. Yeah, you better publish them and live the values. And at
Yeah.
GP, we recently, with all of this work, refreshed our set of values, and we have been doing a tremendous job in communicating that to employees, and have made it a part of our performance review process and everything else. So the core values that we abide by are: customers are our compass, right? So no matter where we are working from, what we're doing, we've got to keep customers at the center of all we do. Big thinking wins, right? Given our ambitions and goals as a company, we need big thinking. We outshines me, right? Even though we are dispersed, there is a we. There's a collective we that trumps the me, right? So we outshines me, and the hungry can be humble, right? So you can be hungry, but you can be really humble, right? You've got to have that intellectual humility. And the combination of that, plus our remote first, plus our way to connect with employees and the trust, creates a wonderful recipe for our company, and our culture is something that I truly enjoy. And I'm actually so grateful that I have a part in leading to maintain and scale that culture.
I think you described it really well, Richa, really well. And I love the fact you started that conversation with customer. So again, this tug of war of employee and employer, and we want to talk about what's missing, what is the lesser spoken stakeholder in all of this transformation. And I think in many cases, it's the customer, it's society, it's the shareholder.
Yes.
But starting with customer, so I just spoke to Dave Ulrich, who's speaking at the
Mhm.
conference, Richa, and again,
Wonderful.
yeah, he's fantastic, and he's going to talk about remodeling the Ulrich model. So
Ah,
his most recent kind of thinking has been the outside in model. So think from a customer perspective and creating value for stakeholders. And more recently, then speaking about human capability to deliver for all stakeholders. So interesting that you talk about very similar type language. You put customer at the center, and those clear indicators of values drive behaviors. And I'm looking behind you. You're in a room. I'm here in a room. You mentioned values on a wall. We traditionally think about culture within an environment, and now not having an environment, it's not about the collective behaviors and how we experience them. It has to be more about philosophy. It has to be more about purpose and what binds us, makes us stronger, as opposed to place binding us. So
exactly.
it's very clear to me when I hear you say that. Can I move the conversation on? I'd love your view on this, Rita, if I may. With all we're seeing in the tech world, you're a tech company,
Mhm.
but you've visibility across a wide range of some of the most pioneering tech companies in the world. With the mix messaging of layoffs, and a lot have done it badly, many have done it very well, but I think it definitely will have a medium term impact. I'd love to get a sense of how you see that would play out. What would it mean for reputation of technology employers, and what does it mean for this sense of family that many tech companies have tried to build but haven't practiced what they preached?
Right. Well, first of all, my personal philosophy, there are no families at work. There are communities. Families don't fire family members, right?
Well,
So,
well, it depends on your family.
well, maybe that's a separate conversation we need to have. It's the community at work, and life is just too short, right? And we spend so much time, so much of our life at work, right? It better be a good community that people can lean on. But you're right about what we have seen in the first quarter. I mean, so far, even January alone, we have seen about 55,000 job losses in tech. So enormous number just for a month. And it is mind-boggling. And Robert, I believe personally, a lot of that was unavoidable given the macroeconomic situations, but some of that was avoidable. But at the end of the day, I think what we are discussing here is how do we, what's the impact of that on the trust and the kind of the human engagement, right? In those communities, in those companies, and what can we do to avoid those? I think there are some tough decisions that need to be made in every company as the strategy evolves, right? You've got to look at your workforce, you've got to shift them. But do you fire and hire? Or is there something else you can do in terms of when you have to do reduction in forces, how you're managing that process? Very critical. You've got to do it with ultimate care, ultimate humility, ultimate empathy for the employees where those are unavoidable. Or where they're avoidable is the long-term thinking around the workforce management, right? We have learned enough lessons now on, headcount is not a currency. It's not. It's not the currency of power for managers, right? So how do we be real about, do we really need that headcount? Every headcount counts. How do we structure our organization? How do we how are we more mindful and intentional about our workforce planning and hiring strategies? So that's very critical. I think it is. I think this time has given us a reality check that all organizations and all management teams need to be way more mindful of how fast we hire and where we hire, that aligns with the long-term strategy of the companies. The other is around when you're up against a tough decision that you can't avoid. How do you think about reskilling first? I have an example from GP. We had two organizations, an account executive organization and account management organizations, sitting in two different teams, both responsible for cross-sell, upsell, and retention of our customers. And the org design wasn't working in the new way of customer centricity. And we wanted to create a different organization called Customer Service Management Org, right? But we didn't let all the AMs and E's go. We said, you know what? We're all in it together. Here's the new org, here are the new expectations, here's the skills that you will need to learn, and we're going to invest in you in the next quarter, teach you everything you need to know to be very, very successful. And here's the new compensation plan that goes along with it, and here's what it means for you. So that a different strategy around reskilling and investing when things shift organizationally, right? So do the best job you can, because, again, being in HR, being in management, the first belief is that humans can learn and humans can grow and develop into the new skills that are needed for future. So how do we put that principle in practice when we are up against these macroeconomic headwinds or workforce realignments?
Well said. Well said. And I think, I think how it's done ultimately creates, I think, the positive or negative experience for folks, and therefore the wider ramifications of that.
Absolutely. Even with the current employees, like the loss of trust that happens, right? The sense of fear that gets created. So the management team, when it happens, have to lean in even more in the go forward workforce, right? And make sure that they feel good and secure and invested in and loved and cared for, right? We don't talk about the concept of love at work a lot, but it's so needed. I think we all need it.
And something like friendship, they're I think in very simple ways, like looking at the screen, there are two screens as far as I can see. So we've got human capital in each of our screens. And what binds us is the black piece there. I think of a brick wall, for example. So the cement, the human capital. And that's what gives us a sense of belonging. It's what gives us a sense of being heard. It's all the soft tissue connection that happens between people. Now, you described it very intentionally in what you do, and there's a virtual component to that, and we can do it in our minds and in our hearts. But the soft pieces around relationship, again, we speak about very fleetingly. We don't actually examine it or look to how we create moments between moments that truly matter to folks. And I think there's a superpower within that soft power.
Couldn't agree with you more. And it's, when an example of that would be when the good work occurs across the globe, how do we give people visibility to recognize that, to see it first and then to recognize it? And the recognition practices in an organization play a huge role in creating that sense of community. So a couple of examples that I can bring from GP. One would be just this, we have recently launched, actually 2 weeks ago, we name everything GP, right? So it starts with GP Rise program. That's a global recognition platform where colleagues can go and recognize each other, and there's a point-based system. So in the first week, we have 80% adoption rate. That goes to show that humans really want to connect with other humans and want to see other people's work and lean in and prop each other up, right? The basic goodness in humans has to be recognized, right? To your point on building relationships and making sure there's a community. Another idea that has been really successful here is, Robert, we live in such a complex and divided society now more than ever. Wars, violence, inflation, all sorts of societal calamities, we at GP have created a concept of circles of care. And when anything of this sort happens across the globe, we pull our people together. We give them a platform to come talk. And, that human connection that happens through sharing their stories and their perspectives on whatever is going on around the world and how it's impacting them, just hearing people's stories sometimes just creates that sense of deep community and deep relationships and friendships that you're talking about. So I think there are definite ways of building this community that is thriving and rich and community oriented. It's so possible, but I think you use the word intentionality. That's important. Being intentional about all of this, be it hybrid or remote, is very important.
Which has been really fascinating to listen to you. I've worked with a lot of your colleagues around the world for several years and have had a very positive, consistent experience. Really good to get underneath the hood to understand the symbols and systems that create that experience for a partner externally. That's been really fascinating. And I think furthermore, I use your product and your service for my customers. I've seen the competitive advantage. But greater than that, again, if this is about the tug of war of work, the stakeholders that are lesser represented, society is one of those stakeholders. We spoke about customer, we spoke about shareholder, but society. And if opportunity no longer, or if talent no longer chases opportunity, and if you enable opportunity following talent, like the impact on society globally is a very powerful force for good. So thanks for taking the time to speak with me. And I look forward to seeing you in person, hopefully at one of your intentional trips to Ireland, Dublin, Ireland this time. And I look forward to seeing your colleagues speak at Talent Summit. So Talent Summit, ladies and gentlemen, is in Dublin, Ireland, the Convention Centre, March 9th, with great range of speakers. Tickets are still on sale, but please don't miss it. The largest ever gathering of HR folks. We'll have space for debate, for conversation, for learning, and the richest network experience you will have had definitely for the last 4-5 years. So talentsummit.ie. Richa, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Robert. And I'll just leave you and our listeners with one message to say, remote work is very possible. To your point, it has deeper societal purpose, right? When you're democratizing work across the globe. It's connecting all of that with how your products work is very important. How you serve the customers is very important. I have a mantra around it, Robert. I call it digital when you want and human when you need. And
I'm writing that down. I'm writing that down. Give that to me again.
It is digital when you want and human when you need. And that is true for employees. So you can connect them in the remote environment through technology, but you've got to give that friendship, that human connection element to it. It is true for the customers. Everybody wants automated experience on our platforms, digital when you want, but you have got to have that human workforce, that element of the service that they can call, pick up the phone and call. So that continues to be GP's motion around how we manage human employee experience as well as the customer experience. So with that thought, I leave you, and I thank you for the conversation today. I had fun, Robert.
Richa, you've also given me my theme for Talent Summit 2024. Now you have to come to Dublin and talk about that. We'll see you then.
I would love that. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Richa. Bye.